I was in a good mood until you started talking to me today.
Well, hey, let's try to get you back in a good mood. This next one may not be the one to do it, though. But, I don't know. No, this is an awkward topic, and it's one that several people over the last few days have been getting in touch with us about. And I don't know what you've seen, and if you haven't seen it, I encourage you not to. But there is a video going around about Paul Orndorff. And I'll read this question here. This was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Tom in Gloucestershire, England. I don't know if I pronounced that anywhere near correct, but what are your thoughts on the news that Paul Orndorff's health has seemed to take a turn for the worse recently? And he attached an article. Sad to see one of the all-time greats in poor health. One can only hope his fortunes will change soon. As I said, and I encourage everyone to not look for this, but Jim, have you seen the video in question? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I have not. So I know that Paul's had health issues going back several years. He was, gosh, how many years ago? Well, was it 3 or 4 years ago we had him on the show here? Was this before you or after you?
This before me.
This was before you, but it should be on Patreon. But
it certainly is, yeah.
And I'm not trying to sell shit. I'm just saying he's been on this program several years ago. He told the story at that point of the fight that he'd had with cancer. And he had a number of health issues. And the last time I talked to him on the phone was probably 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know how he's been doing recently. The thing is, I saw him in 2017 at a convention or fan fest or whatever. He'd lost a lot of weight. And his voice had been affected by the cancer, and also he mentioned to me, he said that because one time we'd lined him up to do the show, and then I called, I couldn't get him on the phone, and then I talked to him later on that night. He said, "Oh shit, I forgot." He said, "It's medicine I'm taking. He fucks with my memory." So he wrote a note to himself and scotch taped it to the bottom of his TV screen. He said, "That way I won't forget it." But I assume, with all the issues he's had, it probably has escalated, but I haven't seen anything lately or talked to him.
It appears he's suffering from, again, I don't know, but from Alzheimer's, and he's not shaven. His hair has grown long. He's in a medical gown, so I assume he's in, I hate to say medical facility, but I really don't know where he is, but It's a rather depressing look at someone who was always so strong, not just physically and, but mentally, just always such a iron-willed kind of guy. It's hard to see that. And, unfortunately, when you do, you start thinking about, Paul is in his late 60s, right? Early 70s? He's got to be somewhere in there.
Well, hold on. I first met him in 1977. He would have had to have been at least 25 years old. So, he's early 70s.
71.
Okay.
And he was a physical guy, and he played football, and then he wrestled a hard style for a long time in Mid-South and out.
But besides that, he did actual fights, non-sanctioned fights. He told me a lot. As a matter of fact, go back, if anybody does have the Patreon, go back and listen to that now, because I can't recount all those stories and do it justice. But he was a badass from the word go, and that's why Eddie Graham was so attracted to him and trained him at that point in time, because he not only was a high-level football player, and he not only could wrestle and handle himself, but he fought also. He did some underground fights to, for money, obviously, but and he was strong as a fucking bull, the Brandon Bull from Brandon, Florida. And, we've told the stories about the fight he had with Vader. Everybody's got their own perspective on it, but almost everybody universally says, no, Paul won it walking off, and Leon wanted to relitigate it, and Paul would have won it again if they'd been allowed to. And I always liked Paul, and we got along great. He liked me for whatever reason that may be, but that's why he worked for me so long early on in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And it was Paul that reunited Bill Watts and I on the phone when Watts had taken the job at WCW. He'd been there for a few months, but he saw one of the TVs or heard from somebody about one of the TVs that Paul had been doing. And he called me that day, and he wanted other things to talk about, Watts did, but the pretext was, how's Paul doing? I'd love to get him back in here. I've always thought a lot about Paul. I said, hey, he's working great. He's performing, because he had taken time off when he had the nerve problem that led to his, left arm atrophying quite a bit. He had that neck problem when he was having that run with Hulk Hogan that was the most successful house show business run in the history of the WWF. And he wasn't about to fucking have surgery then. And he was making money, but he left it go so long that he had serious loss of power and strength and size and everything. And he had taken, a year and a half off from wrestling and started working independence and started working for me. And then Watts called us. I said, hey, he's looking great. Watts arranged to bring him into WCW. That was early '93, and that's when we started doing the potential talent trade and the thing with the bodies and the Rock and Roll Express and the Smoky Mountain Invasion, blah blah blah. But Paul was the reason for that conversation starting, and of course, he always liked Watts. Watts used him great. He was a big deal in Mid-South, and that's when he was just a rookie.
Watts always has a story that, years after the fact, years later, Orndorff randomly called him up to thank him and say he never appreciated all the lessons he learned in Mid-South and how hard he was on him and how he needed that until all these years later he finally appreciated it. He hated him at the time.
Yeah.
But now he appreciates it. And
that's the kind of thing that Paul would do. Because he was a very straight up and honest guy, but he didn't take any bullshit. But he, would look back on something and say, you know what? He did a lot for me. When I first met him, like I said, in '77, that Memphis was his first territory besides Florida, because they had broken him in and trained him. And they had training footage that they showed on Memphis TV to get people ready for him, of Paul Orndorff and Bob Backlund doing training in the ring in Florida, like they trained the wrestlers down there, and the Eddie Graham and the Matsuda and those guys, where they're doing these wild calisthenics and they're doing squats with each other on their shoulders. And the deal where they would lock legs, and like what a neck bridge looks like, right? Your feet and your neck.
Yeah.
Well, some way they would do the thing where they would do that neck bridge, but they would lock legs, and they would somehow be doing sit-ups out of that. It was a goddamn, Backlund and Orndorff, freaks, just athletic freaks, right? So when he came in, he was green as grass, but we didn't know it because we had seen this, and this looked like somebody's training a cyborg wrestler in a fucking laboratory somewhere. And, of course, they brought him right in and put him over a couple of underneath heels in like seconds with the belly-to-belly or the side salto. And then he worked with Lawler for the Southern title, and they put the title on Orndorff because Lawler, see Mark Henry 20 years later, Lawler could work with anybody. He knew whatever the guy's strength was and what he could do, and he would make a whole match out of that. So instantly, Paul Orndorff was a main event guy here, greener than a pepper tree. But the way he looked and the physique and, just his overall presentation, people bought it. And from there on, by the time he went to work for Watts next, and he was in not only Mid-South, but then went to, where was it next before the Carolinas, and then teamed up with Snuka.
Oh, no, that was before all of that. Carolinas was before Mid-South.
Was it Carolinas then Mid-South? Yeah, that's right. Because Carolinas and Snuka and Orndorff was
78,
79.
Yeah.
And then Orndorff working with DiBiase in Mid-South was 80, 81-ish. Anyway, Orndorff, and still in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, that's what gave me a lot of credibility to go into TV stations early on and try to sell the show when I say, look, here's Paul Orndorff. Just 5 years ago, he was wrestling Hulk Hogan in the biggest promotion in the world. And guys like him and Ronnie Garvin, who had some TV matches, it was just a higher level of work. You could tell these guys were talented. And this was, this was not just a fucking local cable access wrestling program when you have guys like that on. So he was a huge help. I've always liked Paul. Like I said, we always got along great. He's a hoot too. if he's on your side, he can be a funny motherfucker. If he don't like you, as Leon found out when he pissed him off, he can knock you the fuck out. But, just what a man all the way around. What a fucking tough guy.
Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more of this guys once they get to their 70s. Guys that you don't think of as being the crazy spot takers or anything. But the Nick Bockwinkel's, the Red Bastines, and now Paul Orndorff, where it's getting to be a trend, and it's pretty depressing. It's pretty sad to see.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Regardless of whether they took ridiculous risks back in those days like the guys do now, which most of the vast majority of guys did not. You had your Chris Colts and your Mike Boyettes and your, guys that took wild bumps just for the fuck of it. But the thing is, the guys in the territory days wrestled regularly, even though they were such experienced workers and they knew not to do things stupid. It was constant repetition. Every body slam, every flat back bump, as the chiropractors will tell you, is the equivalent of a 35-mile-an-hour rear-end collision in a car. It's not going to fucking paralyze you, but it's going to, over a period of time, if you do it over and over, it's going to give you whiplash and spinal problem, whatever else. And the same thing goes, even though you're not landing on your head, your body is at some velocity coming to a sudden stop, and that sloshes your brain around. So think of, a guy like Nick Bockwinkel, who was one of the sharpest intellects in the business, but he also took at least 5 body slams 6 nights a week for 25 years. So that's why I look at these guys. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? You've completely lost the plot on this. Nobody believes it's real. They know you all are working together, but you're taking more physical risks. And not only that, but you're making the people immune to the big bumps that you can take safely because you pop right back up from them. And then you have to take a bigger one that you can't take as safely, and they still don't believe it because they know it's fake to begin with. Or just act like the shit you can control hurts. Because is somebody really going to find a wrestling ring and have somebody else give them a vertical suplex just so they know what it feels like? Or can they just say, wow, look, he picked that guy up, dropped him flat of his back from 6 feet in the air, and the guy's laying there. Must have knocked the wind out of him. Anyway, but I wish Paul Orndorff all the best. I was a fan of his as a fan, and I was always happy when we could work together, and he's a heck of a guy.